Welcome, everyone, to our special virtual event to celebrate the new book by economist Rob Larson, which is called Mastering the Universe, the Obscene Wealth of the Ruling Class, What They Do with Their Money, and Why You Should Hate Them Even More. I want to thank you so much for taking time to join us on this vital live event. And I want to give special thanks to all the folks over at Haymarket Books for organizing it. Before we get rolling here, please do everything that you can to support Haymarket Books. They are a vital publishing house, a vital institution, and we need to support them now more than ever so we can get more great books like the one we're going to discuss today. My name is Maximilian Alvarez. I am the editor-in-chief and co-executive director of the Real News Network here in Baltimore. I am the founder and co-host of the show Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. And it's a real honor to be here with all of you, even though we find ourselves in the midst of some pretty terrible stuff. And before we get rolling into today's discussion, I want to just address that up top. Because, my friends, these are not normal times. These are volatile, difficult, and very dangerous times, bursting with dark and explosive potential. And we must act accordingly. With Donald Trump back in the White House, a fully magnified Republican Party effectively controlling all three branches of America's government, with Elon Musk, the world's richest man and unelected head of the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, taking a battering ram to the very foundations of our system of government as we speak, and with authoritarian far-right movements rising around the globe, we have indeed entered a new phase of struggle. This moment in history is one that, we don't know which way it's going to go, and we don't know what lies ahead. But I am grateful that we all have each other. Whether they've taken the form of joining unions, burning down police precincts, or supporting anti-establishment politicians like Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, the political and economic status quo that working people in the United States have been rebelling against the last 8 years was not set in place by any one president or administration alone. This crisis has been building over my entire lifetime and even before. It's just taken this long for this many people to be feeling it all at once. What the majority of Americans have experienced since a Republican named Ronald Reagan first promised to make America great again in 1980 is 4 decades of the very neoliberal policy poison that has destroyed the foundations of American society as such. Deregulation, public disinvestment, privatization, and the corporate capture of government. The decline of organized labor power. More of our lives spent working for stagnant wages while costs of living rise and good-paying jobs are offshored or automated, replaced by low-paying non-union jobs and gig work. Corporate consolidation. The long-term destruction of industries across the economy, refashioned to produce short-term profits for Wall Street shareholders. Virtually unprecedented levels of inequality, and the societal domination of a small, super billionaire class of capitalist oligarchs. The richest 1%, who, according to Oxfam International, grabbed nearly 2/3 of all new wealth worth $42 trillion that has been created since 2020 alone. More war made less visible. More surveillance, more prisons, more police, genocide and political coups supported by our tax dollars, endless violence perpetrated abroad in the name of freedom and democracy while working people's freedoms and democratic rights have been stripped here at home. Rampant industrial pollution, a boiling planet heating out of control, intensifying climate chaos and the proliferation of uninhabitable sacrifice zones. Cyclical economic booms and busts and crises like COVID and the 2007 financial crash, cumulatively pushing more working and middle-class people downward while transferring more wealth, power, and assets upward to the owners, profiteers, and order givers who are bleeding us dry. Now, history tells us that this should be the moment when the ever-expanding masses of have-nots and have-littles start grabbing the pitchforks and the torches and storming the palaces of the powerful. But history is also full of other examples of embattled societies choosing other darker paths. And we find ourselves now on such a path. And today, I could not be more honored to be in conversation with the great Rob Larson to talk about how we got on this path, where it's headed, and how the hell we get off it before it's too late. Again, we are here to talk about Rob's brilliant and incredibly readable book, Mastering the Universe, the obscene wealth of the ruling class, what they do with their money, and why you should hate them even more. And I highly recommend that all of you out there watching go get yourself a copy, buy copies for your friends. They will get through it in a day, but they will be so much more empowered by reading what Rob has to write. Now, Rob, in case you guys don't know, is a brilliant professor of economics at Tacoma Community College, and he is also the author of other books, including Bit Tyrants, The Political Economy of Silicon Valley and Capitalism versus Freedom, The Toll Road to Serfdom. Rob writes for Jacobin, Dollars and Cents. He's a house economist for the magazine Current Affairs, and he is on the call right now, calling in from Tacoma, Washington. Rob, welcome to the stream, brother. How you holding up?
I'm all right, Max. It's good to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, man. And you know, I wish we were reconnecting under less horrifying circumstances, but I do have to say, and I want to thank you up top for this book because it did bring me back down to ground level when, you know, it's so easy to get so unmoored by what's going on right now. Now, I want to be clear. I was also very angry reading your book, but it was a good anger. And so, like, I thank you for grounding me back in the real when so much unreality is bombarding us every day. And I want to start there before we really dig into the meat of this book. And I want to let folks out there know that we are checking the live chat for this event in case y'all got questions for me and Rob, which we're going to try to get to at the end of our conversation here. So if you got questions for us, please do share them in the chat. Now, Rob, my first question is kind of starting where we started there in the intro. Because, you know, given the monstrous and monumental circumstances that we find ourselves in right now, I think that every event like this taking place right now has a real duty to answer this first question. And your book and this event are actually better positioned to answer that question than most. But what does this book give us that we need and can use right now? And what does it not give us?
Yeah. Wow. Great question. I would say, you know, in a moment like this, when we're really seeing what happens when you empower a real class of, very powerful, very wealthy oligarch type figures, people will often say, well, so what? So they're rich. That doesn't affect other people. Who cares if they're rich? It does affect other people. They can take over the other institutions in society. For example, the branches of government and the administrative bureaucracies that people like to call the deep state these days. On the left, we always used to call them the establishment. Similar idea, I guess, at the base of it. So what this book can provide that's important is just a master's degree in our remote ruling class bastards. That is what it is good for. You can learn all about the wealthy, the money they have, where it goes, everything about that. You can learn about the different ruling class subspecies around the world, which are very, very important, especially for an incredibly powerful country like the U.S. at a time of global power realignment. That's international side's important. And do also conclude with some thoughts about how we can actually move these things into action. So that to me is what the book can provide that's important at this moment. What the book can't do is take a first step for you. Like, it cannot make you start those conversations with your family members or friends about seeing things differently and using your occasional ballot more responsibly. The book can't help you start that conversation on your smoke break where you start chatting with your coworkers about how management's crazy and you need collective representation in some way. You know, the book can't make you go out to a demonstration against the Gaza ethnic cleansing or the takeover of our government in the cold conditions. Only you could do that stuff, but it'll tell you everything you need to know first.
Oh, yeah. I love that, man. And, you know, it's Let's dig into this, right? Because you write in this book, and you have a great line in the intro where you say, and I quote, "You can't overthrow a ruling class you know nothing about," end quote. So, using this book as our guide, let's walk through every facet of that powerful sentence, starting with who and what is the ruling class, and just how big is the gap between us and them.
Yeah, that wealth gap, as we call it, is pretty enormous these days. So exactly how we define the ruling class, is contentious, and there's kind of different parts to focus on at different moments. Traditionally, the Occupy Wall Street movement and then Senator Sanders' presidential campaigns kind of popularized the 1% measurement, which isn't bad. So, for example, the U.S. wealthiest 1% of households, they own about 35% of U.S. wealth. That number's from a few years ago. It will be higher now, and it will be significantly higher after for their tax bills later this year, which is getting us close to the numbers from the old classic Gilded Age from the late 19th century, when we have figures like Rockefeller and Carnegie as the powerful monopolists instead of Bezos, Musk, and Zuckerberg. But very similar figures exploiting network power and using their money in similar ways, like taking over media to talk about how great they are, putting on blue collar cosplay. These guys only go in public wearing, MMA togs or Carhartt work gear, but fundamentally it's a dress up like the working class thing that's always been part of ruling class culture. So that's one way to chop it up, is that 1%. Another way, and the one that's preferred by most of the financial world, is to use the definition of the unwees. That's the ultra high net worth individuals. Usually that is classified as a family with $30 million or more, usually of investable assets. So that doesn't include like your family's real estate holdings. So if you have a house you own and a vacation home or two or apartment that you own, that's separate from your 30 million bucks. So different ways to chop it up, but that's fundamentally who we're talking about. Whereas, of course, for the rest of us, I mean, the working class is not a homogeneous body, but our pay has been stagnating or barely rising against inflation for the last couple of decades. What's especially impressive is watching the actual, not just inflation adjusted pay in America struggle to grow, even as the economy itself blows up in terms of the money being made, but also seeing our actual American lifespans decline, mostly for more like blue collar segments of the working class. A stunning thing to see when people are becoming, centibillionaires, where they have hundreds of billions or more, as just a few individuals do today. Amazing to watch those things happen at the same time. So to me, that is the real picture of the wealth gap.
And you talk very openly about this in the book, and it's something that I think about a lot. Here reporting on this stuff for the Real News is like the gap between us and the 1% or the 1% of the 1% is so vast that it's practically beyond our human capacities to understand. And it feels like that is a constant, because if we did fully understand it, like I said, we would have had the pitchforks and torches like a long time ago. And like, I wanted to ask if we could just sort of tease that out a bit more. I mean, Senator Bernie Sanders was on the Senate floor yesterday, I believe, pointing out that the three billionaires, that Trump had at his inauguration, that's Musk, Zuckerberg, and Bezos, collectively, the three of them, three people, own as much wealth as like the bottom 50% of this country. Like, that sounds ridiculous, but I still can't fully. It's like asking me to count the number of stars in the sky. Like, I mean, how do we, I guess, communicate to folks like just that this is not just rich people and non-rich people. Like, this is an astronomical divide between a tiny group of rulers who have untold wealth and the rest of us. Like, how do we drive that point home?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I would say, like, American oligarchs do kind of hide behind America's kind of lack of literacy and numeracy. Literacy in that, people overseas make huge sacrifices to get access to independent media so they don't have to follow a propaganda line. And in America, you can have access to almost anything you want, and people just can't be bothered. We're watching TV, we're exhausted from double shifts. So the ruling class is happy for us to be kind of disconnected from events the way maybe more actively reading, if we had that kind of leisure time and that reading culture, population would be. So there's that aspect of it, but the numeracy is even worse. Just thinking about the size of these numbers, as you said, I always tell my students that if you just start counting, and this is like a cliche, but if you start counting, you can count to 1 million. If you count like one number per second, you'll reach 1 million in a couple of days. Counting to 1 billion takes many, many years to do that, just as such a stratospherically higher amount. And once we get into hundreds of billions, it's even more insane. Yeah, making this stuff comprehensible to people is like a part of the battle. And, it's just easier said than done. Because like you said, yeah, it's like picturing every grain of sand on the beaches. It's kind of impossible. So one thing I try to do, and this may be helpful to people, is to go down to like specific things. So this is from memory here. Folks will see it in the book. But if I recall, Jeff Bezos's yacht cost a couple $100 million. I think it was a $400 million. And that's his main yacht and the support yacht that follows it and contains like the jet skis and the tenders and supplies and all that stuff. The backup yacht to support the main yacht. So $400 million, like a big modern hospital costs like $200 to $300 million. So it's in that yacht, you've got a hospital or two. And a lot of people could really use that with our healthcare problems and our tendency to leave working class people with debilitating injuries, as I'm sure people running OSHA are sweating right now as they look at Elon Musk's breathy tech teens prowling through the administrative agencies. I'm sure they're sweating it too. But reading OSHA reports is an incredible thing. I mean, you've used the phrase to refer the phrase of sacrifice zones in blue collar communities, like East Palestine, where we have these huge chemical burns after derailments. And I mean, there's thousands of places like that, from Native American tribal lands that are full of waste from our uranium mining, all the way to Black communities, which are, statistically poorer than the average and therefore more likely to have waste incinerators in them. Like, this is the reality of the wealth gap. It's not, oh, they have 2 houses and I only have 1. It's they have 20 houses and enough wealth to control a lot of the world. And because you're poor, you live in an environment where you experience disease and suffering. Like, this is what a class society is. It's about class segregation. And they'll put you, you'll be placed into a spot that you can afford. And in a society with the wealth gap, that might be one where, yeah, there's a train derailment near you or a garbage incinerator nearby, and that's going to affect your kids' lifespans. Believe that.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully and powerfully put. And the first interview I did with a railroad worker, a great Matt Weaver from Ohio, he's with the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Union. He was the first railroad worker I spoke to after the East Palestine disaster, and we just crossed the 2-year anniversary of that on February 3rd. He made the point very clear. He said, look, these railroads are not passing through the backyards of the rich. They're passing through our neighborhoods. They're passing by our t-ball games and our churches. And you can see that written throughout the landscape. Like, there's a sacrifice zone in Baltimore, like 15 minutes from where I'm sitting. I've gone there to report. The life expectancy of wealthier suburbs 20 miles in the other direction is like 10 years. Like, the difference of over 10 years life expectancy in places like Baltimore and Chicago, depending on the zip code that you live in, like, tells you a little bit about what we're talking about here. And I wanted to, like, before moving on to sort of the next question, I wanted to kind of pause to sort of clarify terms and do a little myth busting real quick, right? Because You know this. I think we've talked about this. Like I've been very open about it, but I grew up deeply conservative. I grew up believing all of the American dream mythologies, believing in capitalism, and I was an avowed capitalist 20 years ago. But you know, when you're a teenager, you don't really know anything anyway. So like, take that with a pinch of salt. But the point being that I can feel my 20-year-old self, like so many others who have been conditioned in this capitalist society, to hear what you're saying about, you know, Jeff Bezos's like gross, you know, absurd yacht and his backup yacht. But still the American capitalist conditioned response is to think, well, that's their money. They can do what they want with it. So I want to ask if you could sort of address that kind of point. And also like if we could address like the question of wealth and how wealth is a necessary sort of side to this that we need to understand, that is not just raw income.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's a great question. And of course, in the book, I have a dedicated chapter to doing nothing but going one at a time through the different fairly hoary right-wing mythologies that people have to justify the ruling class and, you know, justify their wealth or make people less concerned about it or make it seem like they're entitled to it. And, you know, there's a lot of those. I mean, traditionally in the Gilded Age, it really was like, well, they're just the finer families. They're the best people. And that's kind of more of a European nobility thing. Like, we're the nobility. We're superior to you. You're just born into a wealthy, inbred, aristocratic family. Like, literally entitled. Like, that's where the word entitled comes from, is you're entitled to your dukedom or whatever because you were born the royal viscount of godforsaken whatever. So really these days that one's more retired, and it's more about what supermen these people are. And if people are wealthy, it's because the market's rewarding them for creating so much value and so many jobs. If you take a look at this stuff though, like every one of these claims falls apart. Like a lot of our super very wealthiest individuals and households in our ruling class right now are in the tech sector. And there it's mostly just exploiting monopolistic or oligopolistic platform power. And, you know, I have a whole book on Silicon Valley too. People can look at if they want to learn about this. Like the nature of markets like search or sharing video or operating system software. Like those markets are prone to monopoly and having very large concentrated positions. So just being at the right place at the right time with a tolerably good product is often enough to leave you in command of those markets for decades on end. I mean, you know, that is Google and that is Facebook and certainly Microsoft herself, you know, back from the 1980s. Just Bill Gates' mom being on the board of the United Way with the head of IBM is why you know, what became Windows was the operating system on the IBM and clones, and that's why Bill Gates is still in the top 5 wealthiest people to this day and telling us which vaccines we should and shouldn't have and what climate change battles we should and shouldn't fight as he takes his private jet around the world. Like, it's because of network effects and those markets' tendency to monopoly. And furthermore, I mean, the technology itself is mostly developed in the public sector through the Pentagon system and the universities that built up the original internetwork that became the internet system. Most of the actual mobile phone hardware we experience today, or large parts of it, including GPS and the display and the HTTP code that the internet runs on to make your phone useful. All of that stuff comes from military or scientific research in the US and Europe. And if you look at other wealthy individuals, you usually see similar stories of running monopolistic firms or taking over rackets. But that also connects closely to the second thing you mentioned, Max, which is looking at wealth rather than income. And that's actually a really important thing. If you look just casually online or at literature about inequality and the wealth gap in society, it usually looks at income levels. Like, what does the poorest 10% of households make in a year versus the richest 10%? And there's nothing wrong with that, except wealth inequality is always much greater than income inequality, just because income, as we say, is a stream, whereas wealth is a pool. So if you have income inequality for a long time, you're going to have giant wealth inequality as I make more than everyone else year after year. And I think personally, the best way to see that and to connect it back to the question of corporate monopoly too is through the issue of stock. And this is something I always want to hit on because I feel a lot of people, including people on the left, are very aware of the wealth and power of the 1% or other definitions of the rich ruling class households we have. And they're very aware of the power of big business and corporate monopolies. But connecting those sometimes is something that people aren't really aware of. So just for people's knowledge, the limited research we have on this is pretty impressive. Wolf studies on this finds that, there we are. The wealthiest 1% of U.S. households owns 40% of all traded corporate stock. So that's quite a bit, 40% that's owned by that richest 1% of households. And if we look at the richest 10% of households, they own 84% of the stock equity. I mean, what that means is right now we're in earnings quarter. If we have any financially inclined listeners, this is the week or two that comes every 3 months, and everyone in business and finance and the Wall Street Journal gets very excited because it's earnings seasons, and we'll see exactly how much money Chase Bank and Amazon and ExxonMobil have made with all of our labor and purchasing over the last period of time. But not mentioning that those profit results are mainly relevant to the wealthy people that own the stock. If you own a corporate stock, you're entitled to a piece of its profitability, and we call that a dividend payment. Like, that's the reality. Like, these people don't just have a lot of wealth. They own multiple homes outright. They travel as they wish, and you own businesses. You own corporate wealth. Again, middle class households, you're so happy if you own your house outright. Like, middle class and working class households, your wealth is whatever you might have in your home, maybe, and your car. Like, those are like working class assets. The definition of the ruling class is having not just lots of material goods, but that investment portfolio that gives them ownership of the corporations and the means of production that those corporations own that we all go to work for every day. Like, that's the picture of wealth I think people would benefit from.
Man, I have so many kind of thoughts and questions about that, and we'll circle back to them if we have time. But I want to keep digging into the book here. But like, I think this is a perfect lead into sort of the next big question I wanted to ask you about the ruling class and how we, like you said, you can't overthrow a ruling class you know nothing about. And so, I wanted to ask, like, in terms of breaking that sentiment down, like, now that we've talked about who and what the ruling class is and how big the gap is between their wealth and ours, it follows that the next question would be like, how does that class position of the ruling class translate to the power to rule over all of us? What makes that class not just the elite class, but the ruling class?
Yeah, well, to me, that's a really important question. And people will say, okay, so they're rich, but ruling does imply, that they have power over us or could direct what happens in the world. And to me, there's two pieces to that, because naturally people think of the ruling class and they think of, people in positions of political power who, after all, do write laws and start wars. I mean, the power of the state in its different forms is incredibly real. If you take a look at the state, though, of course, it's now notorious for mostly serving the needs of the wealthy, protecting our corporations, spreading, the way for their influence overseas. Going after Europe for fining even our tech platforms, relatively modest amounts. That's important. And that's why we have figures like Harlan Crow, the famous billionaire real estate inheritor who keeps taking Clarence Thomas, our Supreme Court justice, on undeclared vacations to various luxury destinations around the world. It's to keep exerting the influence of the wealthy ruling class over decision makers. And of course, the Supreme Court has only decided to make itself more prominent in these kinds of decisions. And there's a huge amount of research on the wealthy and how they're able to get their policy positions through governments a lot more efficiently than, say, middle or blue collar households can. So that's significant too. But the other thing about ruling, I always remind people is, it's not just government policy that shapes what happens in the world. It's corporate investments. It's investment spending by companies, spending by firms on the next generation of capital. What are we building? what is the economy going to look like next year rather than right now? And if we take a look, like those are decisions by the corporate property that, as we just saw, mainly belongs to that same ruling class. So if you're a figure like Jeff Bezos, you put huge amounts of money into lobbying, you get huge amounts of money from government contracts, you own a newspaper so you can shape the ideas that people hear, and you still have, at least in his case, at least still a board seat on Amazon, if not still the CEO position, in a position to influence what Amazon invests in, who's going to get a warehouse versus who gets a cloud computing center. These are not small decisions. Again, this is short of government policy, what state gets to have an economic future or not. And that's a decision that's completely in the hands of the ruling class's corporate property. So in addition to their control over the state through, figures like Mitch McConnell and obviously, today's administration, which we can get to, which is composed mostly of billionaires at the cabinet level, which is significant. That's what makes it a ruling class. It begins with that ownership of the productive corporate equity and all the productive assets of our society, the oil refineries and the giant agricultural estates and the cloud computing platforms and the chemical plants. That's the productive property. And again, it makes them rule over us because at the end of the day, we are human beings and we have to eat. Baby got to eat. And if some billionaire decides to lay off a bunch of people in the plant in your city, you can't turn to your kids and go, well, look, next year I'll feed you twice as much. You just won't get anything this year. Mathematically, that averages out okay. No, you will hear from Child Protective Services. You have to feed kids regularly. So that means anytime labor union goes on strike or someone's just between jobs, the clock's ticking on them to find another source of employment, to find another billionaire's corporate property that will briefly hire you with as little obligation as possible, and preferably in one of the nightmarish, completely ungoverned gig economy roles that we learned so much about on the Working People podcast. That's where they want us. And that's what makes it a ruling entity, where somebody somewhere is on an island that their family bought, having a wonderful vacation with celebrities and getting drugs to improve their health and extend their lifespan as much as possible. And meanwhile, you're standing in line at a grocery store with an app that won't load and there's no one to talk to, but you're making pennies for that corporate overlord. That's the nature of the rule. It goes through the political system, which often is what people see more because that makes the higher headline. But that ownership of the business world, that is what shapes who wants to have AI slop running our future economy? Very few people. But the corporate world's very excited about laying off a bunch of white-collar people to go with all the blue-collar people that have been laid off. That's the nature of the rule. It's political, but it's also economic.
Yeah. Man, I think that's really, an important point. And, it's funny because, grimly funny because, for our lifetimes, there's at least been some level of theatrical commitment to that division between the corporate world, the world of industry, and the world of government. And it's kind of there ain't no pretense anymore, right? But we can sort of see the point Rob is making with what's happening in front of us, right? I mean, I remember back to my old conservative days when Citizens United was, a news story. I remember believing the Fox News line that hey, I have my speech, they have theirs. If they got more money, who am I to say that they can't, advocate for the candidate that they believe in? Now, fast forward 15 years later, and you've got Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, donating over $200 million to Donald Trump's campaign. And now he gets rewarded with this unelected position where he's taken a battering ram to the very foundations of government, using those levers of government to openly, nakedly, unabashedly, in the most corrupt fashion, benefit his own economic interests and desire for more power himself, whether it be the contract that SpaceX just got this week, whether it be him eliminating, or cheering on and having a hand in eliminating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which would have been scrutinizing Musk's plans to partner with Visa and create a payment system on his platform X. So that's kind of like what we're talking about here, where like more money equals more power, and like they're not even trying to hide it. And granted, they weren't trying very hard before, but it's just the door's been busted open in that regard, so we can see the naked machinery of oligarchy at work there. But I wanted to make one other quick point, since like we've already mentioned East Palestine, Ohio, the catastrophic train derailment that happened there 2 years ago. I want to just like focus people on that for a second, because it really makes the point that Rob is talking about here, right? Because you have railroads, which are a vital component of our supply chain. Anything you buy, or most things you buy from a store, was on a rail car at one point or another, or the components that made it were, right? I mean, it is a necessary feature of our economy and the global economy, but it is owned by, private corporations who have effectively consolidated and worked out a gangsterist, like oligopolistic system, where like four major railroads have like their claim on different parts of this country's railroad system. Now, when we're talking about like the Wall Street investors and executives who are serving their bottom line in the ways that they are steering these companies, you see right there that these railroads and the business practices therein are explicitly driven by the need to increase, this fiduciary need to increase payouts for shareholders at the expense of communities like East Palestine, railroad workers who are working people like you and me. There are over 1,000 derailments in this country a year. They just don't all happen to like occur in the backyards of a sleepy working class town, but they pass through cities like Chicago, DC, and everywhere. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to like, I think it really makes the point that like they are in their quest for profit, their class position, their ability to dictate corporate policy, their ability to buy off government agencies that want to regulate them or what have you. Like this is steering the control of an industry for the purposes of the rich at our collective expense. And you can see that in the catastrophe of East Palestine and the hell that those working class people have been left in, while Norfolk Southern continues to rake in billions and billions a year.
It's true. It's still an incredibly profitable rail line, never profitable enough, of course, for its equity holders. That's unbelievable. 1,000 derailments a year. I thought I knew something about that. People, you should look online, just look at a video of a train derailment just to see what a single one of these things is like. It's like any other industrial accident. Like you only kind of understand what you're seeing because it's industry and you don't know how to operate these machines. But just watching that, like, if you go online and you're having a really rough night, you can watch videos of industrial accidents or train derailments. Fascinating and worthwhile because it makes you realize the mind-bending amount of danger that working class people are in every day, from our outrageous undocumented agricultural workers who, thank God, we're getting rid of finally. It's absorbing pesticide every day as they work by hands in these fields, railroad workers. Out here where I live on the West Coast, our big railroad regional monopoly is BNSF, Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which is majority owned by Berkshire Hathaway. That's billionaire investor Warren Buffett's property, of course. And it's fascinating, along with Norfolk Southern and some of these other lines. They're constantly fighting against the rail workers unions to reduce staffing on these trains. And their position is, for years, we can have a single man, a single operator on a train. It's fine to just have one person running a train. Today's train consists can be 2 miles long, 2 miles of gigantic truck-sized rail beds, and you have a guy. And the crazy, outrageous unions and their inefficiency are like just trying to hang on to the second employee on a machine that's carrying, like a lot of that is carrying, fuel oils and chemicals, as in that case of that Ohio community. Just incredible danger. And it's just other banal stuff too. Like if you ever, when you're driving around and you see cell phone towers, if you ever see a worker on the tower, like maintaining the equipment or replacing the plane light at the top of them, They're very, very small because those things are psychotically tall. In rural areas, those cell phone masts are taller above the earth, the ground level, than the Sears Tower is in Chicago. And you're out there with no protection, not even the shitty elevators with ladders with the little metal rung around them, not even that. The level of danger the working class takes on all the time, I mean, just is something on its own that we should think of. And of course, the owners of these possessions are mostly in air-conditioned offices when they work, which to them means giving off orders to other people. And then you're off to your vacation home. Watching working class people recover from the stuff we do to them in the course of them getting their minimum wage is, yeah, that can really move you inwardly quickly, is what I've discovered.
Yeah, we really can. And all of those decisions, cutting the staff on the train from like 5 people down to 2, and they want to get it down to 1.
Oh,
Cutting the
luxury.
Yeah, cutting the staff of the dispatchers in the office who are responding to distress calls, cutting the staff of the maintenance workers who check the track, cutting the staff of the carmen who check the cars and could have found the faulty bearing that caused the derailment in East Palestine 2 years ago. And carmen have told me explicitly that we have been under speed ups. We've been getting top down pressure from management to not report cars with issues because then we slow down the trains, and that hurts the bottom line of the Wall Street overlords who are telling us all to do this. So that's
almost always means slower, and that's I'm losing money.
Yeah. So we won't like beat a dead horse, but just look at any industry that you can imagine. Healthcare, the same kind of corporate takeover, cost cutting, staff cutting, piling more work onto fewer people, treating patients like customers, all for the purposes of increasing revenue. Like, I mean, look at how that profit-seeking disease has taken industries across the economy that we all work for, depend on, and made them awful, and like more dangerous for the sake of short-term profits. Like that is kind of what we're trying to get folks to see. Like that is not only unaccountable private corporations making decisions that directly impact our lives where we have no recourse over that, but it is also, those corporations, those business interests capturing the regulatory agencies of government, capturing the sort of fourth estate of journalism to hold them accountable, like finding these ways to effectively keep doing what they're doing for their bottom line while the rest of society burns. And with that, Rob, I want to kind of like move into this last big kind of book question here. Again, going back to that great line in your intro where you say we cannot we cannot overthrow a ruling class we know nothing about. So when it comes to this ruling class, their obscene wealth, and the overwhelming system that enriches and empowers them while grinding us down to dust and debt, what does this book teach us that can help us overthrow them?
Yeah, well, of course, I do my best. At the end of the book, to have a chapter on coming back against this incredible institutional and political power of these unbelievably wealthy individuals and families, and the answers, I mean, are mostly traditional ones. I mean, the obvious one is that the U.S. labor movement used to have significant clout in the U.S., but labor density peaks in 1953, that is, at about a third of the workforce, which is not a stunningly high number, and is in slow decline after that, and then after the 80s in steep decline. And it really, it does tell, that is the goal of these firms and their owners always, above all, is to avoid any kind of organization by their workforce, not just because we have to pay them more, although obviously that's outrageous, but also because they will want some autonomy. They'll want to have some limits on staffing. They'd like to be able to draw a red line and say at least 2 humans have to run this train. Or those crazy, organized nurses. The thing they always point out is when the medical and hospital and clinic corporations that own so many of those entities, they always want them to get their work done more quickly. The first thing that happens is they wash their hands less. And as you may know, bacterial evolution is trying to destroy our society by having bacteria evolve antibiotic resistance. The safety stakes this tend to explode so much. So all these people are trying to organize, and firms, the fact that they resist it so hard, I think, does kind of indicate exactly how the importance that they put on trying to keep us from being organized. And I have a whole section of the book there where I just look at a few sections from this book, which will be infamous perhaps to anyone in the labor movement, Confessions of a Union Buster, which is a truly unbelievable text. I'd heard of it, but never read it till I worked on this book. People really should pick it up. It's a juicy enough memoir that you actually will travel through it quickly, and you'll see just the unbelievably dirty tricks that firms are willing to use to go after unions and crush them and completely contort how people see the issue. So that shows how important the labor movement is. I think if we want to overthrow the ruling class, the labor movement's going to have to be dramatically resuscitated compared to its position today. Although, as you know, many of us are seeing, and as I also review in the book, we are seeing at least a labor renaissance, I think is fair to say, a resurgence. We'll see how things go for the next couple of insane years. But that's the first important part of it, is that workers have organization, and that needs just another social mode too. Again, people right now are so terrified by what's happening with every issue and the new administration. I mean, the first thing you can do to just feel less horribly consumed with anxiety is to go out and be part of any kind of in real life social organization. And that can be a union, that can be, a political thing you go to, or even just going out with your friends to a point helps with this. Keeping those social fibers in the fabric of society in some kind of condition. I mean, Elon Musk would love for us all to never speak to each other, but just go through life looking at apps that he clumsily controls. Building up those ties, and especially labor movement ties that let you get shared experience struggling against some firm and its hired union busting scumbags, is a very good first step. Obviously, though, even if you have the biggest labor movement in the world, or at least a nice, strong, established one, like we in the US had in the 50s and 60s, that will only give you so much power and only give you so much influence. And if firms develop globalization and outsource a lot of that industry, we'll just lay off all your workers and you'll be back to square one, because they use their ruling power to decide, okay, we're closing down all the factories in Ohio and Indiana, where I'm from, and Michigan, and rebuild them in Mexico or other export platforms around the Western Hemisphere or the Pacific Basin. So that's the first piece of it, but it means you have to have a political side to this too. And so I feel if we had a strong, active labor movement that was facilitating some form of a radical political movement, radical to the extent of wanting to redistribute property in society, not just income through a social security plan or a UBI or something like that, but actually taking that corporate equity out of the hands of the ruling class. I mean, that's why neoliberalism happened, was because 1950s and 40s radical socialists were beaten and the unions took a more collaborate with the corporate community route. And so all those wealthy people and corporations still owned all the property. And once you go through some inflation in the 70s, people kind of forget that you can't trust the ruling class, and they start outsourcing and breaking the unions and painting them as the villain. So to me, when you have a large enough labor movement and a large, as it were, socialist political movement that can move forward like a real policy change to expropriate that productive property, not your personal car and toothbrush, but the oil refineries and factories and data centers, the productive wealth that makes society. If we're in a position to have that kind of bill, and then of course, the ruling class will throw everything at keeping it from being passed, and that's where you need a labor movement strong enough to do a general strike, to force the ruling class to accept this reduction in its wealth and prestige. So obviously, in my mind, this is like a whole set of related social movements, and even if things were to go great for us in the coming years, that would be years down the line. But I think that's a realistic assessment of at least the very broad outlines of what it would mean to go after these guys and try to overthrow a wretched ruling class.
And there's like, on that note, right? I mean, there's going to need to be creativity. There's going to need to be, people are going to need to be brave, right? People are going to need to be daring. People are going to need to show their mettle in this new age, right? Because when we talk about like the need to revive, a more militant, class conscious, like labor movement that doesn't make the mistakes of the past in trusting the bosses and the owners to sort of work together with us. I think we got enough historical evidence that not want to do that. But we're in a moment right now where this breaks my heart time and time again as someone who's been reporting on this labor renaissance. I was there in Bessemer, Alabama 3 years ago, right when the Amazon workers there like really jump started a lot of this out of the COVID nightmare that we were all in. And like they lost that struggle. But like it was after that Starbucks workers later that year really launched their historic wave of organizing, though they are still fighting for their contracts with the company, Amazon labor union in New York, but also like union drives at places like Chipotle, places like Home Depot. The first Whole Foods in Philly just won its union vote. So like that whole struggle across like the sectors of the economy. I think the most new unions we've been seeing in the past few years have been in higher education, right? I mean, so like there is a real like grassroots resurgence of labor militancy in recent years, and that even goes back to like the teacher strikes of the past decade, right? The Red for Ed movement and all that good stuff. But we find ourselves now at a moment where Donald Trump has effectively rendered the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, moot. Like it's not working right now. Like he fired General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo, fired another Democratic appointee. The NLRB does not have quorum. It's not working. Like it effectively sending the message to businesses and workers across the country that workers are on their own. There are no enforcers at the NLRB to safeguard labor law and workers' rights right now. And so if we're talking about like getting more workers organized, which we definitely need because we just dipped into single digits from the stats from last year. We are now under 10% union density in this country. So like, that feels so daunting and impossible. And yet I want to remind folks that the NLRB was itself a creation in response to, the social upheaval, the class upheaval of the 1930s and years prior, right? I mean, like, Roosevelt didn't just give the NLRB and the NLRA like to the American people. Like it was demanded of workers who were fighting back against the bosses. And so we're in a moment like that now where the institution like the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRA, which Elon Musk and many other companies, Jeff Bezos, want to throw out, that is the foundation of contemporary labor law in this country. They want to get rid of that. So does that mean we have no tools? No. It means that like we have to and are actually given the opportunity to think outside of the restrictive bounds of current labor law, which I can tell you as someone who reports on this stuff is not good enough. Because like I said, the Starbucks workers don't have a union. Pittsburgh Post-Gazette workers have been on strike for over 2 years. And the National Labor Relations Board has validated their claims, and yet they're still not working. The company can still just stonewall them at the bargaining table, and no one's doing anything about it. So the NLRB was not going to save us in the first place. But the question now and always is, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond? Or are we just going to wait for whatever comes down the pike from this administration that's trying to actively immobilize us? Like, that is a question that Rob and I can't answer for you. But it is a question that I think gives some hope, because it at least reminds us that the answer, the what lies in the future is not pre-written. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks, months, years, because we have not participated in writing that story. If we don't participate, I can tell you how it's going to go. If we sit back and do nothing and let them do whatever they're doing with no resistance, no alternative movements, no alternative visions for a different future, then I can tell you what's going to happen. But what happens next depends on what we all do right now. And Rob, I want to kind of like, by way of transitioning to the sort of close here, because I want to make room for Q&A from all the folks watching right now. But this sort of brings us nicely full circle back to the crisis that we find ourselves in right now. And, I'm connected with labor union folks, working class folks in different sacrifice zones around the country. Like, I've talked to so many of these folks. I know their stories. I know them well. And it breaks my heart to see so many of them buying into the narrative that is coming out of the Trump Musk White House right now, right? That like what they are doing to the federal government right now is good. This is the Department of Government Efficiency. This is, the running government like a business and rooting out the corruption and the waste and yada yada yada. Like, that sentiment is still pervasive among a lot of people. And so I wanted to ask, like, for folks who are feeling that way, or for people who know people in their social circles who are buying this, like, if we look at what Musk and Trump are doing and not what they're saying about what they're doing, like, what do you see happening right now? What actually is taking place in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people are talking about oligarch coups. This administration is elected with the actual popular vote by a modest margin even. But it is definitely, at complete odds with what the campaign was fought on, and the near entirety of the decision-making echelon of the administration is made up of billionaires and other very wealthy figures. So I think what they're doing right now does look a lot, and other people have made this analogy too, but looks more like the 90s in Russia to me, where it's, okay, this old great regime of the Soviet Union or the New Deal Great Society of the United States, like, this is ending. What can we get out of this? Like, right now, like today, for me, the well-placed, Commerce or Treasury Department secretary or other billionaire donor to the administration, and there were so many of those. And so trying to pull the copper wiring out of the United States is, I think, something that we're seeing here. You have Musk, the most powerful of them all, getting into the actual nerves of the Treasury system. People have no idea, like, how dangerous that is. Apparently, based on what he says, and you really can't put any stock in what Trump says because he'll reverse himself tomorrow, and he says the most idiotic stuff based on whoever the last person to speak to him was. He said that there were anomalies in Treasury bill payments, and maybe we won't honor those. Much talk like that will destroy the dollar's role as the world currency, and that will have a major effect on the standard of living in the United States, because we rely heavily on being able to run endless deficits based on the fact that the dollar is the world reserve currency. This gets into a bunch of macroeconomic and historical stuff. Just to say, like, this is just tampering with, like, the pillars that our empire, like, is built on, and that the existing system, which has worked so well for our ruling class. I mean, look at their wealth there. So I think in time we're going to see pushback from other billionaires in Trump's orbit who are saying, well, look, we don't want to push the whole structure over. This is how I maintain control of my workforce, is through the system here. Obviously, they're happy to have the NLRB and OSHA and the EPA all be destroyed because they just get in the way. But watching this just unconstrained looting, just, all these people should be fired. You people are all corrupt or lying, probably. Just like changing thousands of people's careers and whole capacities of the state to react based on your dumb, lazy online posting forums has been an amazing thing to watch. And what's happening right now is we're seeing, and these will be legally contested, it'll take time to see how these shake out, but thousands of resignations and firings by federal workers. And what that means is, for example, the next big disease outbreak will have even less of a coherent response. We laid off thousands of public health workers in the austerity measures after the 2008 financial crash. We're laying off thousands more now. And so when bird flu gets out of control and we have uncontrolled transmission among people, or whatever is the next significant epidemic, we'll be completely unable to respond to it. And indeed, with Kennedy in charge of HHS, they may tell us that it's better to get bird flu than get vaccinated from it. So it's kind of rough to see this stuff, but it means the government will have worse disease response, will be worse work safety in the economy. People are going to get hurt more. Their unions are going to get broken more and more unfairly. The IRS is not going to be able to respond to your questions because we're laying off staff there. Like, at every turn, we're making government shittier, less responsive, more threadbare, more understaffed. This is supposed to free us from having to pay taxes for them and create all this new economic growth. What will grow, of course, is the net worth and the account balances of these really ruling class individuals. So kind of an unusually brazen smash and grab of the national level government assets is what this looks like. But these years of deficits have made the U.S. and its economic system a little more delicate than I think people realize now. Time will tell, I guess. But watching this happen, it is just such, I would say it's unusually naked rule by the very highest levels of the ruling class. And a lot of billionaires prefer to keep a low profile because they know a lot of people don't like how wealthy they are and how much resources they monopolize. And there's plenty of some of the wealthiest Americans have names you've never heard of. And they're some obscure hedge fund director who lives in Connecticut somewhere. But then you have, of course, the ones who are on TV, who are usually ones that have major psychological approval problems like Trump and Musk and others. And watching them take it all the way to the top and just start kicking the system apart is pretty rough. But there's no opposition to them because we can't have a labor party in this country. We get two capitalist parties, and one of them at least has the strength of its convictions, and the other one mostly scolds its base for wanting Bernie Sanders. It is a demoralizing landscape.
It is. And this would be a topic for a whole other stream, but it needs to be restated, that everyone who has contributed to eroding the state's capacity to meet people's needs, eroded the very concept that that's what the state should do, has had a hand in this. Right. I mean, we mentioned sacrifice zones. We talked about, the toxic pollution that I'm investigating across the country right now. The EPA was created by Nixon in response to massive public outrage over rampant toxic pollution. The Cuyahoga River was on fire every couple months. It was awful. And people on Earth Day said enough is enough. We need more accountability here. And a Republican administration responded to that and believed actually and set a standard that this agency was meant to actually regulate the entities that were polluting our communities. But over time, it's been Republicans saying we need to cut the funding for the EPA. That's Republicans being Republicans. And it's been Democrats saying, we need to make the EPA work with the corporations themselves and sort of have them have more voluntary commitment to fulfilling these standards, which they never did. And so I can say in places like East Palestine, people don't trust the EPA because the EPA is there to serve the interest of Norfolk Southern, not the people. That's why the EPA officials have been going around telling residents, you're fine. Don't worry about it. You're not poisoned. Even while they're getting nosebleeds in their own homes, they're still getting skin rashes. They're bioaccumulating these toxins. They're being lied to because the government agency that was set up to protect them has been eroded over years. It has been corporate captured. It has been cut staff wise year after year till people's faith in it collapses. And when people's faith in the institutions of liberal democracy to meet their needs collapses, their desire for extreme alternatives rises. And that is what we've gotten with Donald Trump and why so many can just sort of not bat an eye when he says he wants to eliminate the EPA. That's one example among many. But the point being is that the neoliberal bipartisan erosion of our government's mission and ability and desire to meet people's basic fucking needs, pardon my French, has all contributed to the lack of consent of the governed, the lack of faith of the governed in the things that Trump is destroying right now. So how do you make an argument for the things that have sucked but are still necessary? And we're going to be a whole lot worse without them than we were even with the emaciated versions of them that we've ended up with. Sorry, that was a bit of a tirade, but it's such a tough spot we find ourselves in there, Rob. And I wanted to sort of end on this question because I think it's really crucial for all of us. And it goes back to how can we use this? How can we use all the brilliant work and insights that are here in your book to fight for a different future? Trump is he's justifying all of this by telling a story. And he is telling a story that is distracting from like the capitalist coup that's happening right now. And he, on the campaign trail and even from the White House, like he is speaking to real touch points of neoliberal system failure, like the EPA, but among many other, examples. So he's hitting those touch points, but then he's providing lies, half truths, and scapegoats to explain those system failures. And so my final question for you, Rob, is like, what counter story are we telling? What alternative future could we be imagining and fighting for with a book like yours and the information and perspective that it offers us?
Yeah, right on. Well, to me, I mean, I think to me, the key to this is that most people find the world to be shitty now. People are aware that everything costs more and is of crappier quality. Your insurance, when you can get it, is so expensive and covers nothing. And you can't buy things now, you get subscription models. And at every turn, you're kind of screwed and your employment doesn't cover your basic bills. We have an insane cost of living crisis in this country now. It's pretty amazing. So to me, like, yeah, Trump's got a story, and people who are really plugged into politics and right-wing politics and Trump, like, are naturally going to like that. The thing we have is that most people are aware that they can't really get by so good. To different degrees, of course. People are aware that they're struggling and that a lot of people they know are. And how is it that we have so much money, but I don't get any of it? I work hard. My friends work hard. So that incongruity where we're told we have a great system, our system's working great, great administration. Like, people know from their lives how hard it is. And if you get sick or injured, that can dominate your life economically. I mean, for the rest of your life, like, you can be trying to pay down medical debt, an outrageous phenomenon that most countries with money don't even have, So to me, that's the thing, is that people are aware that conditions are rough. And actually, this is why labor movement has that saying that the boss is the best organizer. It's when they're most happy and content that they're most infuriating their workforce a lot of the time, because they're happiest when the workforce is most exploited, and therefore throwing fuel on the fire, though, of attempts to organize, which, may or may not succeed. But to me, like, the story we tell is, in my view, is that these guys don't create value. These guys buy existing firms. Elon Musk bought Tesla and pushed out the founders and now acts like he invented it when he's not even a scientist in the first place. So, like, that narrative dominates, and, company founder, CEO, fighting waste. Like, that's the thing on TV. We on the left still benefit from the ability to say TV is pushing a bunch of bullshit. This is a corporate message that a large commercial entity that you're online or watching on TV is bringing to you. And I think it's like what you said in your book, like, it's about honoring the humanity of working people. And if you foreground their humanity, like their struggles, and their struggle, the proletarian struggle, it's also that these people can have, like, food for their kids and a little time to spend with them. Like, it's all for pay hikes and for vacation days at the end of the day. But, like, that's what these people are fighting for. I mean, who is sympathetic, Warren Buffett or these railroad engineers who are trying to keep a second man at the end of a miles-long train? I mean, I know who I guess would get the public sympathy there. And obviously, public opinion doesn't have much influence on policy anymore, or we would have had Medicare for all 20 years ago. But that gives us a message too. Like, yeah, Trump's got a message that he and his billionaire friends are getting rid of regulation and growing the economy. But you know that you've never recovered from when your kid got his leg broken and you had to use your credit card to pay for the health care. Like, you know how hard your life is and how much you're struggling. And you, even white collar people who are always the wedge that the rich can sometimes persuade them that they're going to become wealthy. You're about to become Jeff Bezos any minute. Accountant who works for him. And obviously I have a section in the book on the white collar segment of the middle class or the working class and how we should think about that. At the end of the day, we all share one thing in common, the threat of a pink slip from one of these billionaires, so being able to bring a convincing message, like the winning Sanders message that won until it was, crushed using everything the ruling class could bring against him. Like, that's because of the success of that message. It's not because Sanders has so much personal charisma, So to my mind, that position of centering the person who we know does the actual work that these billionaires take credit for. I mean, that's the That's the counter line that we have, and I think we should make sure that we remember that.
Hell yeah, baby. I thought that was, yeah, beautifully put, brother. And again, if you guys like that fire, you got a whole lot more in this incredible and very readable and very necessary book. So I cannot recommend Rob's book enough. Like I said, buy it for yourself, buy it for friends, support Haymarket books, and go buy Rob's other books, which are also really, really important and well written. And, I want to kind of like, toss you some of the questions we've got from the folks watching, Rob. And I think like just two sort of elephants in the room that should be noted, because I don't want to give the impression that Rob doesn't like address this fulsomely in his book, which he does. But the other two elephants in the room is that these pieces of shit are going to get us all killed. Like, they are destroying the planet. They are literally like, their climate footprint is so much like bigger than ours. And in fact, the sort of economy that they're trying to create, the society that they're trying to hasten us towards, is one in which climate catastrophe intensifies, not lessens. More chaos is created. More parts of the planet become uninhabitable. More political chaos resulting from famines and mass migration and so on and so forth. They have their foot on the gas pedal of society going in that direction, not the one that we need to be going in. So there's that side. Rob has a whole chapter about it. Go read it. And then the other side, and this is something that honestly, Rob, as a labor guy, as the host of Working People, as someone who talks to people daily about the value of their lives, their work, and what they produce for the companies that are ripping them off. One of the things that keeps me up at night is that the universal adage of the power we have in our labor and to withhold that labor is exactly the thing the ruling class has been trying to get itself out of since there's been a ruling class. And I guess what I mean by that is that they want to have a society and an economy in which they are not dependent on the labor of people. And they are looking for ways to monetize and commodify life itself. They commodify our attention. They commodify our data. They commodify our biometric data, right? And our debts, right? I mean, like, they are looking for and finding new ways to sap value out of us without even having to compensate us for our labor. So we need to be real clear that, like, even as I fully agree with Rob that labor is, and labor power, like, is so vital to, like, the fight back, we need to be very clear about, like, what they're angling for and how we fight back against, a capitalist class that doesn't need us for our labor because they force us to become dependent on their shitty AI, right? Those are questions that we have to be asking ourselves, and we need to have ready answers for them. And speaking of ready answers, Rob, I want to, in the last 15 minutes here, I want to give people access to the good ironic professor himself and throw some of these questions from the live chat at you. Some of them we have addressed, but if you have more to say on them, please do so. I'm going to kind of start with some of the more recent ones and work back up to the top. But we've got two here that I want to toss to you because one is, I think, really important. It says, Rob, can you walk me through an economically sound response to Joe Rogan's insistence that it's stupid to think the richest people in the world would have anything to gain by taking control of the government? So Rogan thinks that it's ridiculous to think that a ruling class would want to take over the government. How do you respond to that? And then another question that's sort of in that vein is, how scared do you think the ruling class really is about people like Luigi Mangione, who, of course, infamously, assassinated the healthcare CEO just a few months ago, prompting a nationwide sort of uproar, both fear and pearl clutching from the ruling class and the media class, and like Robin Hood-esque levels of popular support among, the internet and most regular folks who knew the score of the story. So yeah, your response to Rogan and like how scared do you think the ruling class is about people like Luigi and what he represents?
Yeah, those are great questions. So as far as the Rogan one, I mean, my God, that really is a classic Rogan question because it seems like it's too dumb to be it seems like a joke question. Like, why would the ruling class want to gain control of the government? Because it's the main instrument of power and policy formation in society, and it gives you a control over people, so you get to have power that you can become sexually aroused by because you're one of those people. And then B, it gives you the ability to steer more resources to yourself through government policy. I think that my company should get this large contract, which is just what Elon Musk is saying outright to NASA right now. Like, because you get to write laws that favor your company or that make it harder for your workers to organize. So why would ruling class want to gain control of government? Because they like money and power. That's why they're the ruling class, is because they're attracted to that, or an ancestor was. Like, that's what a strange question. Like, why would Skeletor want the mind control cross of Kurglagon? Because he wants power over everybody. What a strange. Rogan is such a strange figure. Like, he really is, just based on whoever he's talking to at the moment. And I guess that's the cliche people say about him, but it really, a man who'll endorse Sanders and then Trump. I mean, that kind of tells you everything you need to know, really. Like, that question I kind of don't understand, because people like money and power. I guess maybe there's a counter argument there that Rogan had in mind. I don't see.
It's
But
probably like I have to imagine that it's like Trump's line about running a second time. He kept saying on the campaign trail, like, "Oh, I didn't have to do this. They treated me so unfairly the last time, like, but I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for the people because I believe in America." Like, I have to imagine, and I'm reaching back into the recesses of my former conservative self here, that it's asked in that sort of vein, from a sort of like, a false naivete about the very obvious and, truthful points that you're making. But it sort of takes the business class and what they say about government at face value, that they don't want to have to deal with that they'd rather just focus on like their industry and whatnot. So I think you burst that bubble beautifully.
that makes a lot of sense, but I would just say, like, Trump is, again, the classic case. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do a bunch of rallies where everyone says my name, and then I go on TV and everyone says my name. Like, yes, you do. You're one of the great attention whores of the 20th and 21st centuries. So yes, you do. Yes, you do. The thing they're saying there is, why would you want to go into government? And the thing is, there actually is a case for this. If you're, Elon Musk is special, so he's considered a special government employee, he isn't held to any of these rules. If you want to be a cabinet level appointee, or cabinet level White House officer, you have to make concessions. You have to put your wealth in a blind trust, and there's a lot of reporting, and maybe you have to sell stakes off. Like, there's rules and disclosure requirements around that. And then you're in the public eye more than if you're just some anonymous hedge funder who only people who are really interested in your industry have heard of. So yeah, you're in the public eye and people criticize you. Why would they ever want that? Well, because some ruling class people are delighted to live a life of quiet, anonymous, insane luxury at our expense. And others are twisted attention whores like Elon and Donald, who will do anything to be rich and powerful. Elon Musk, he buys Twitter, and then Joe Biden's Super Bowl tweet gets more retweets than him. So he's so emotionally delicate that he forces his indentured servants to change Twitter so that he gets bumped up above every other post. Like, that's because, so some of them are depraved attention whore neurotics would be the answer there. I mean, they're different individual types, and a lot of them would be, oh, I can't stand this paparazzi always giving me attention. Stop. So I would say that that's part of it, Joe. And I don't think you, Joe, with your Hollywood experience, can truly say you haven't met a rich person like that. Like, Hollywood rich people are all like that. It's an attention industry. So that's an interesting thing. That's Rogan's complexity for you. As for Luigi, I mean, they're definitely afraid of this because, well, I think a lot of wealthy people now, they see the labor movement being pretty beat up over all these decades. Socialism's barely a presence apart from a few endangered Congress people who the Israeli lobby has been bumping off. I don't think they're as much worried about that as just, like the FBI with terrorists. It's like, yeah, but individuals, this is America. Anyone can get a giant weapon and write cool, politically motivated slogans on shell casings and kill you on the streets, and everyone is delighted by him, especially when he turns out to be really hot. Like, that threat's not going anywhere. And so I think they fear that just because, political movements, labor movements, like you can destroy these things. You can create the FBI to crush the socialists. You can stop and, you can, you can destroy the quorum at the National Labor Relations Board and more easily stomp on unions and prevent them from getting anywhere. But in America, the definition of America is individuals with guns. And that's not going anywhere. So I think the threat that these guys will occasionally infuriate someone and destroy their life so much that they feel they have nothing to lose, and they go and get a 45 and put 3 bullets in your spine. That threat's not going anywhere. Like, I'm not surprised that they're making such an example out of Luigi and perp walking him and publishing editorials in the national press about, this guy who denies health insurance claims to people is the real working class hero. This guy just got his life ruined because he experienced an accident, and now he's gunning down people who are denying his claims and ruining your life, but then I get an extra penny every time I deny your life-saving surgery. That threat I don't see going anywhere. And the thing that people are saying online, I think, actually does have a lot of truth to it. Like, those who made Bernie impossible made Luigi inevitable. I mean, that's a little, that's a slogan, but there's something there. I mean, we're socialists and labor movement people. We preferred a social movement. You wall to wall bricked off the possibility of a social movement, so you're going to get McKinley assassination type actions instead. I would have preferred a social movement, but you guys put us in this position. You put us in this pressure cooker. Everyone's got machine guns in this country. You can see how that could come about.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not like it doesn't threaten us as well. I mean, shit, I'm here in Baltimore. Like, we've got gun problems and gun violence that affects other poor and working class people as well. So it's like we're already dealing with those effects, but you really, I think hit on a crucial point there, Rob, because it reminds me of when the George Floyd uprisings were happening in 2020, right? I mean, the largest kind of protests across the country that we've seen in our history. And they were even protests internationally after, the killing of George Floyd by Minneapolis police, right? And I remember going on, maybe it was the Rising at the Hill or something like that. Maybe it was Breaking Points. And I got asked the question, do you condemn the burning of the Minneapolis precinct? Do you think this is the right way to protest? Or same question came up ad nauseum when, Mangione assassinated the United Health CEO. And my answer is always the same. It's who gives a shit what I think about this? Is there really anyone sitting there waiting to see if I endorse this or don't endorse? That means nothing. As a human being with a pulse and as a historian, what I can tell you, like I told them in 2020, was this is what happens when you leave people no other option. This is what happened. That's like asking me if I endorse the tides. That's like asking me if I endorse sunsets and sunrises. These things happen naturally as part of the flow of the world. And if you create a situation like the one Rob and I have been discussing over the last hour and a half, where, the vast amount of a society is being pushed further down into a meat grinder in such an unfeeling society that has so little to offer them. And you have all the wealth and power getting concentrated at the top, all the agencies, all the systems that are meant to and should support life itself and the flourishing of life of all. When you create a situation where all that stuff is collapsing and the divide is growing and the police presence is intensifying, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think has happened throughout history when you put people in situations where they have no way out? That is in fact the beautiful core of humanity at the center of such tragic stories, is that human beings will never just go quietly into the abyss of non-existence, into the abyss of full silence, into the abyss of not demanding that our humanity be recognized. This was Fyodor Dostoevsky's great critique of socialism, is that you could create the most perfect society ever, but there is a deep, inextinguishable human impulse that will want to put its stamp on the world, because that's what humanity is. So you're never going to get rid of that. So that's always going to crop up when people are put in a position where they have no way out. They're still going to lash out. They're still going to find a way to express that anger that you cannot erase. And I think, yeah, to answer our viewer's question, like, I think you're damn sure that the ruling class is terrified about that because they know they can never fully stamp that out.
It's true. I mean, I always say it's like those cases where, a guy abducts a woman and keeps her locked in his basement for years. Sometimes those people get out and they run away. Sometimes they get out and get a knife and they stab the guy and murder him. Do you condemn her murdering him? I mean, she shouldn't kill him, but I mean, he shouldn't have locked her up for 10 years. I mean, it's to be expected. You have feudalist uprisings or, prison riots at twisted third world, carceral facilities. It sucks that it came to ugly violence, but it was the forces of society that boxed those people into a position where they had no option except just accept being ground down into the dirt or strike back violently, for better or worse. Yeah, do you condemn it? Well, I condemn you guys for giving people no choice. Like, that is whom I condemn. That's one way to get out of that one.
Oh, I guess, yeah, very well put, brother. And like, we are coming up on time. Like, again, I really appreciate the questions that folks shared in the chat. Like, again, some we did address parts of, like the Musk-led, federal payments crisis and like what's really at the center of that, right? The ridiculousness of continuing to think that the market is going to solve all of our problems, like we've been told it would for the past half century and even farther back before that. So I do apologize if we didn't get to your question specifically, but I do hope over the last hour and a half, our brilliant guest Rob Larson has answered those questions. And if you have more, go read his book, because I can guarantee you that you'll find more of the answers you're looking for there. And Rob, I just wanted to kind of give you the last word here. Like, are there any final kind of thoughts you wanted to share with folks about what's in this book, what's not in it, the moment that we're in? Anything you want to say in parting to the folks watching right now?
Just that, this is a really rough time right now. It's when you're trying to reach out to people to communicate with them about this. I mean, maybe this is trite, but I just feel like charm is so important. Like, to the extent you can keep desperation or quick responses from your voice in mind when you talk to our fellow working men and women, who are just sucking up corporate propaganda when they're not working 2 shifts all the time. We have to cut each other a little slack, and again, recognizing the big mess of everyone's lives. And that's part of the beauty of everything. And it means that not everyone can, be out in the street and learning every detail about this stuff. But also those of us who are trying, to bring things forward, we need to have some personality. You need to have some charm. If you're going to talk to people about this stuff, because, people don't like feeling too pushed or too hastened toward a goal. And in my writing, I try to make it jokey and as fun as possible. It's because, first it's economics, and it's usually nightmarish slog reading economic stuff. But making this stuff fun, or at least interesting or entertaining, is how you get people attracted to this stuff. So in your own work and media making and conversations with people, God, it's an insane thing to say. It's such a twisted global moment as this. But you got to keep it light. You have to keep it focused on the positive thing we could get. Think how great it would be if we had more vacation days. If we had Medicare for all, you could start a business or lose your job and not worry about coverage. You wouldn't have to fight healthcare and spend an hour on the phone with your insurer every time you need a procedure. Focus on the positive, fun things that we could have if we got just some social democratic reforms or real social programs of wealth redistribution, just to the extent that, it's a traumatizing time. But if it's trauma forward, when you talk to people, it's just going to be harder, to get them to be receptive to what you're talking about. So I guess just when we talk to people, try to think about what will help actually advance the movement forward there, because everyone's already, stressed out and struggling with their own version of what they see as the reality around us, I guess.
So that is the great Rob Larson, economist and author of the new book, which we've been discussing today, which is called, once again, Mastering the Universe: The Obscene Wealth of the Ruling Class, What They Do with Their Money, and Why You Should Hate Them Even More, which is out with Haymarket Books. Go get yourself a copy. Subscribe to anything and everything that Rob writes. Do everything that you can to support Haymarket Books and the great work that they're doing. And please support the work that we're doing here at the Real News Network, because we can't do any of this without your support. That goes for me, Rob, and all the good folks at Haymarket. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for fighting the good fight. Thank you for caring. And this is Maximilian Alvarez from Baltimore signing off. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Solidarity forever.
Thank you.